Hello, and welcome to this session on modern authentication, why passwords are no longer a priority. My name is Dwayne Natwick. I'm an MCT regional lead out of the United States. I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP and hold multiple certifications. You can reach me and communicate with me on the social media links provided on this slide. So welcome to this session, and what we want to talk about today is I'm going to talk about the evolution of authentication. I'm going to share a personal story that I'm going to give bookend this presentation with, and then we're going to go into some of the identity management and authentication concepts that are important to understand as we're talking through security and identity around Microsoft 365, Teams, as well as the Azure environment. And that includes the principles of zero trust model, user risk and conditional access policies, privileged identity management, and then some modern authentication techniques that are becoming more prevalent. And Microsoft's also providing us with capabilities to bring those into our environments through Azure Active Directory. So let's start with just talking about the evolution of identity. Really, to think about what we're trying to do is what we're ultimately trying to do is improve network security and bolster our security. And one of the things about passwords is that 81% of successful cyber attacks are due to compromised usernames and passwords. And it's not anything malicious in most cases by the user environments. We're talking about things like just people utilizing unsecure passwords such as their birth dates or their wedding dates and things of that nature within our environments. And it is easy for a attacker to create some level of a dictionary attack against those things and find things out on social media that might give them clues in terms of what somebody's username and password is. And that's really where these cyber attacks then come from. And it then bolsters or creates success for these cyber attacks within the cyber kill chain, because the first and foremost thing that they want to do is gain access. So what we want to do then is ultimately protect our passwords, or ultimately what would be helpful is just getting rid of the reliance upon passwords entirely. And as we look through the evolution of identity and access management, we look at the traditional. And the traditional is we were in an on-premises environment. We had our on-premises Active Directory. All identity was handled within the four walls of your building. There was generally no single sign-on between cloud and on-premise applications. Most organizations had all on-premises applications. Any users' cloud applications might have been something that they were utilizing as for personal use. But most organizations in the traditional, 10, 15 years ago were not utilizing cloud applications. They were utilizing on-premises applications that were in their data center that they had full control over the boundaries. They controlled how traffic was entering their building, how people were entering their building, and it was very limited visibility into the identity infrastructure. As we moved into cloud, we got to more advanced features, and we're now started to federate the on-premises system with cloud services and needing to provide some level of gated access. Single sign-on became popular in terms of hybrid identity environments, and now we're concerned with what might be taking place in terms of risk and the risk of users that are utilizing both cloud applications and on-premises applications that share the same identities. So we needed to build additional analytics to improve visibility, and we'll talk about some of the things in terms of policies that can be utilized to build this advanced identity platform here in this session. And then we get to the optimal, which we're slowly getting there in some aspects of our environment, but this is really passwordless authentication. We're enabling the use of Windows Hello for Business, or utilization of the authenticator applications that are available for Azure Active Directory, as well as many of our other online cloud identities, to have the users not rely on passwords anymore. We're also enabling multi-factor authentication and utilizing that as another gate of security, and we'll talk more about that in a second. And then all of that behavior then within the Azure environment is now analyzed, and we get real-time understanding around threats for cloud applications, as well as threats in terms of users and devices through the various monitoring services that are built within Azure Active Directory, as well as Microsoft 365 and Azure Security Center, to understand where our vulnerabilities are, where we're missing controls, and where we have global threats that might be infiltrating into the entire Microsoft ecosystem. So let me share a personal story. I'm going to give you kind of the background here first and foremost, and then we're going to utilize the rest of the presentation to kind of bring it all together here at the end. So a few weeks ago, my son's account, I started receiving emails during the day while I was working from Xfinity, which is my internet service provider, that my son had changed his password. The password's been changed on his account. He was at school at the time, so I knew that at first I had done some changes over the weekend with his account, so to get him online, and he then I thought that might have been what was lagging behind in terms of a notification. And so I ignored the first one. Then I saw a second one come through not long after that, and I'm like, well, I better check on this. So I went and checked. My son's identity had been compromised within our Xfinity account. Now, luckily, I had the admin rights, and I went in there, saw that somebody changed the recovery email. They put a phone number in for verification, and neither of those were ours. And we'll talk about what I did to fix all that in a moment. But then after I got that taken care of, a little while later, I received one that Microsoft password has been changed. So I go and take care of that. And then when he gets home, he goes to get on his Fortnite account, and his Fortnite account's been stolen. So we have now been through a full range of the cyber attack chain of, they gained access, they got privileged rights within our accounts, and utilized that to essentially perform a cyber theft of stealing his Fortnite account and everything that he had in there in terms of where he was level-wise, all of his skins, and all of his cyber goodies were all gone. And so that was very damaging to him, being a young person, that, just the same as us getting our bank account stolen, essentially. So we had some work to do to get it back, and we'll talk about that here at the end. But mostly, what to take out of this particular portion of this slide is that we were relying too much on passwords, and that caused this particular cyber attack to take place. So as we go through and we build to that advanced and optimal evolution of our identity management, what we need to think about is the principles of zero trust. And so what Microsoft has in terms of our zero trust principles is, we want to protect our access to resources from threats. That is ultimately what we're doing when we enforce our identity protection. And we want to provide users with the ability to have access to the resources they want when they want them. And as an organization, we want to make sure that everything's secure. So there's this constant little tug of war that takes place between the user environment and our IT group, our security groups, that need to understand what's going on with the environment. And so this builds this whole circle of what we're going to do in terms of our trust, but also make it as seamless and easy as easy as we can for our users to access our environment. And we need to also have a level of intelligence in terms of how we're going about doing this, both in the cloud as well as on premises. We want to provide a level of dynamic protection and know what's going on within our environment for our within our user environment in terms of risky users and devices that are at risk. And then we also, Microsoft has that level of machine learning that is all part of their entire ecosystem that helps to detect anomalies within our environment when something is not looking right in terms of a user's general usage of the environment and what might take place in terms of anomalous behavior that we are not recognizing as typical. And that brings in our zero trust model. And many of you that may be familiar with conditional access policies, when we think about the zero trust model, it looks very similar to how the flow of a conditional access policy takes place. And zero trust model is just that. We are not trusting anybody. We are assuming that a breach has taken place, and we want somebody to re-verify that they are who they say they are before we provide them with access to what they're requesting. And so we are looking at a number of different conditions that might be the triggers, and then we determine what set of actions we're going to take before we provide access or maybe block access to resources. And that's really what comes down to the zero trust model. And that might be enforcing a multi-factor authentication verification for making somebody change their password, or making sure that they're utilizing a proper device that's joined to Azure Active Directory before we provide access to those resources. And this could be based on where they are in terms of location, what devices they're accessing, or what risk level the environment is seeing that person that is trying to access being. Maybe they are accessing from another country that they've never been seen accessing resources from before. Perhaps they were in one place and accessed information. They accessed information from the United States, and 15 minutes later they're accessing from the UK or from Europe or somewhere in the Middle East. They need to, and the system and the machine learning processes understand those anomalies and how that is an impossible travel situation and can put that user in a risk level based on that, based on those anomalies. And so conditional access, as I stated, is that first step in zero trust. We are going to put policies in place based on how a user generally does their work, with what devices they access from, and put those all in place and look at all of these things here in the middle in terms of the session risk, and what the location is, the devices they're accessing from a number of locations, from a number of devices. We can put in trusted locations to know that these locations are within our corporate control, these IP addresses, and these devices that are within our corporate control are verified and compliant, and what IDs we're utilizing in terms of Azure Active Directory or Microsoft accounts or federated services with other identity management services. And we bring that all together, create the levels of conditions or triggers that we're going to have, and then what controls we're going to do. And as I mentioned before, we can require multi-factor authentication. We can limit access to only certain applications. If we have applications that have sensitive data, we can block access to that while they're on that particular device. We can force those password resets. We can just strictly block access if we want to both the Microsoft Cloud, to many different software as a service applications out on the cloud, as well as our on-premises applications if they're registered within Azure Active Directory. And the second set of that, as we've talked a couple times, is around risk events with conditional access policies. And the machine learning capabilities within Microsoft provide, as I've stated before already a few times, analysis of a user's general usage of the environment on a day-to-day basis and looks for anomalous behavior and behavior that is atypical to their usual activities, and then looks at all of that and looks at what's going on with that user and gives them a level of risk. And it might be device and device compliance. It might be, again, things in terms of impossible travel, anomalous IP addresses, potential thoughts that this user's credentials might have been leaked, or if they have an infected device. So all of these things go through this diagram on the right in terms of what Microsoft is constantly looking at in terms of risky users within Azure Active Directory. And these all come into play then in those conditional access policies and work hand in hand with conditional access policies, as well as give us some helpful insights into our environment that we can review on a regular basis and look at within our organization, within our Azure Active Directory, for where those risk levels are, and evaluate maybe we have some certain users that are coming up on the risk list and what has taken place to take them from a low maybe to a high risk level within our environment. And these risk events have through Azure Identity Protection, look at those suspicious activities and then create that record in that risk event. And there are a number of risk events here in terms of leaked credentials, where a valid password has been compromised, those anomalous IP addresses. Maybe somebody has taken a trip and they're signing in from somewhere they've never been seen before. They might get flagged. They might get flagged low just because we don't. It's not anything that they're signing in once. It's flagging it as a anomalous IP address, but it's putting it in the panel so that we can review it and audit it and identify that this is not anomalous activity. We know that John Smith is in California when they're usually in New York. They're on a business trip and they're working from there. But it still gives us that insight and that information to understand our environment. And then we can then put policies in place based on what level they're at, and these can be within the identity protection portal themselves, or they can be tied to conditional access policies and what we're going to handle. Generally, within the identity protection panel, it's allowing access, requiring multi-factor authentication. There's not a whole lot you can do within the Azure Active Directory identity protection in terms of the risk policies. You can do a lot more with those conditional access policies in terms of flexibility in what you do, but this still is the first and foremost a good way to apply some gates and some parameters around that zero trust model to help you with your level of access and those users verifying that they are who they say they are. And this just brings us back around to those different conditions. And we have multiple levels of conditions, users, and groups. We can assign to specific groups that are high level of travel and high risk groups, such as maybe sales. They're traveling. A lot of times sales aren't the most technical level people to understand and think about the potential security risks in certain places, probably going on public Wi-Fi quite a bit, so we can put different policies based on different groups that carry and access sensitive levels of information, and put those groups, such as our finance department or our HR department, on a special condition based on specific applications that have GDPR information or PI, different personal identifiable information, or if we're a healthcare organization in the United States, healthcare information that might cause a HIPAA concern. We can look at all of those things and then allow or enforce some level of re-verification of who somebody is when that condition's met, to allow somebody to have access or block access again to that sensitive information. Privileged identity management then takes on another level where we're talking through and talking about our privileged administrators and who has administrative access within our environment. Where conditional access works across our entire user environment, privileged identity management is a way to help protect our identities and protect that escalation of privileges that an attacker might get within our environment. And when we look at privileged identity management, we're thinking about a time-based, just-in-time level of approval for our privileged users. We are giving them access when they need access to applications, and they are then given that access for a limited amount of time. Therefore, we are decreasing the open levels of the attack surface for a cyber criminal to get in. If they find their way in, they generally are going to get kicked out before they potentially can do some damage, or we're going to also know that something has taken place as well. When you bring in privileged identity management, you're automatically requiring those users for multi-factor authentication for an additional level of re-verification as well. So we are creating now an auditable, just-in-time process that is time-bound for somebody to gain administrative rights for doing a specific job within a set amount of time, rather than just giving people administrative rights all the time. And there's a justification and approval process that takes place, and notifications that take place when somebody activates those roles, and it's all auditable within our system. So that helps to avoid any potential issues within our environment. And if there are issues that take place or compromises in a user's identity, we can go back and investigate. And this is ultimately the workflow that takes place for our privileged identity management. And when I talk to people about the planning or identity management and access, it all comes down to starting with a plan, not just for your privileged identities, but for all of your users, how we're going to handle our environment. Planning and communication is of the utmost importance. And so we create a plan, we get stakeholder involvement in terms of what that plan's going to be. We write policies about that plan and communicate that out to our users and our administrators on how this is going to take place. We then assign those roles to our user environment and our current admins to who's going to be eligible for those administrator roles within privileged identity management. And it should not be everybody within the environment. It should be specific based on roles and role-based authentication on what they need access to. We should not be assigning everybody global administrator rights. And then we activate those users for to be eligible for those roles. They're assigned, then they make those requests. It's approved to activate for that time-based limitation, and then we can then audit that as it goes through. And then we also then do access reviews as we go continue through the process of monitoring and managing. We look at access reviews, and we then periodically review what is taking place within our environment, whether somebody that was given administrative roles still require that role, and then we review and renew and maybe remove that eligibility within a specific user. They may have changed job roles and don't need to do that anymore. I always use the example of a good role-based privileged identity management role might be somebody in HR being given a user administrator to add new hires, and they can request those new hires. But then that HR person might move to, say, marketing, and they no longer need to do that. We need to have that level of access review on a regular basis, and we can set up those access reviews to take place, on a weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly basis, so that we are looking at all of our administrative roles and looking at the groups of people that need that access, whether they continue to need that access, and we can remove that eligibility if that's no longer necessary. Again, decreasing that attack surface for cyber attacks. All of this falls into a level of modern authentication. And now we're going to talk about some of the other ways to bring modern authentication into play within our environment, how we get ourselves from that advanced level, which is really where conditional access policies and multi-factor authentication fall into, to that more advanced and optimal authentication technique where we're getting more passwordless within our identity and access management. And first and foremost, secure authentication begins with multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication prevents 99.9% of identity attacks. We still have that 0.1 because somebody could leave their phone unlocked and somebody could steal their phone as well as their laptop in a coffee house, which then still creates a level of compromise. But the key thing here is multi-factor authentication utilizes things like biometrics of facial identification or fingerprint ID, as well as different token approvals and approvals on authenticator apps or through SMS text or even a phone call to a personal device to verify who you are. And that's the key thing around multi-factor authentication. Then we take that a step further in terms of secure authentication and passwordless credentials. Many of you may utilize Windows Hello for passwordless authentication, where we have now utilized the protection capabilities within Windows 10. We're using facial recognition that's doing a level of multi-factor authentication because you have put in a PIN number into your environment. So that's your two factors just built into Windows Hello. We can use the Authenticator app with a code that we need to put in, or a push button approval when we want to access our accounts. And then we have our Fast Identity online security keys that we might utilize for access, and these can be a USB key. This could be, again, a code that regenerates itself within a certain amount of time, like a RSA token, and we then can get ourselves to that optimal passwordless environment. Now, I've had some questions and some things when I've been teaching classes about some of the limitations, especially around Windows Hello, where we we're using Windows Hello for Business for access to our laptops. However, accessing through other devices and other cloud applications, we still need some level of password and multi-factor authentication, and it creates a help desk issue where users are no longer remembering their passwords, so they need to do a lot of self-service password resets. If we don't have self-service password reset enabled, the help desk's getting calls to get passwords reset because somebody has forgotten their password because they're not used to using it on their laptops. Those are things and some of the limitations where getting to that passwordless level without all of your applications adhering to utilizing things like authenticator apps, we get into potential situations. And that's all part of that evolution of where we're going in terms of identity management. As more and more applications get to this passwordless capabilities, specifically around utilizing different authenticator apps, we start to get to that optimal passwordless environment. And that's where we look at and where we think about now what happens with passwordless when we go passwordless. How does that help in terms of that tug of war that I talked about early on between the organization and the organizational security needing our user environment to be secure and as secure as possible, and then our users needing access to that information as easily as possible and as quickly as possible. And what we get with our user environment is our user environment feels that passwords and two-factor authentication with utilizing MFA is inconvenient, even though it is high level of security. Like I said, 99.9% effective. Passwords, again, most of our cyber attacks, 81% of our cyber attacks take place because passwords and usernames are compromised. So we're very low security, high convenience, mostly because people are using insecure level passwords. So we need to find that high security and convenience level, and passwordless does that, because all you have is that step of pushing an approve button or utilizing your biometrics and who you are to gain access to your resources. So the user environment, it's fairly simple once it's implemented properly. So they see a level of convenience because they don't even need to type in a password anymore. So that's a level of convenience. They're just pushing a button or looking into a camera. From an IT organization, we're now feeling secure because we know that they are utilizing something that can't not be compromised in terms of biometrics or the access to their personal devices to approve on the authenticator apps, or utilizing those keys that they have in their possession. But again, we aren't quite there yet from a full-fledged capability. Microsoft actually has rolled out, and if you go into your Azure portal and put in authentication, we can find the ability to enable passwordless authentication within our Azure Active Directory now, which is a great step in the right direction from that standpoint, from a business perspective. Again, though, a lot of applications and platforms haven't quite gotten there yet, which cause potential for concern around what we can do as a full organization. But this is getting us there. First and foremost, we need to enable two-factor authentication, and then look to go into these different passwordless type authentication methods wherever we can and however we can. And that brings us back to my little story that I was telling at the beginning, and we'll wrap up talking about this, where as I stated, my son's Xfinity account and Microsoft account both were compromised. It caused a cyber threat and cyber theft of his Fortnite account. What I ended up doing was I had to go in to my administrative platform, my administrative panel for Xfinity, get the recovery email and recovery phone number changed. I went into Microsoft again, did the same thing. I put both of them on the respective authenticator apps for Xfinity as well as Microsoft, which is one of the little inconveniences sometimes with utilizing authenticator apps for passwordless, is that different platforms from a personal standpoint might use different authenticator apps. Google doesn't, Google has their own authenticator. Microsoft has their own authenticator. I found out Xfinity does, and I can't use the Microsoft authenticator with Xfinity. So we're utilizing multiple authenticator apps, but still, if you have notifications on, it's going to push that information up to on your phone anyway for the approval. I did get Xfinity authenticator app on his phone. He is now passwordless for his Xfinity authentication. He's passwordless for his Microsoft authentication. I did have to, for Fortnite, we had multi-factor authentication in play, but that multi-factor authentication was through his Xfinity account, which was compromised. So that's how we were ultimately had that identity stolen. So I had to go through help desk with Epic Games to get his account recovered. Once I got his account recovered, created an auto-generated password with multi-factor authentication through Xfinity, which now is protected by passwordless authentication. So we should now have everything properly secured. And again, I talk about security quite a bit and identities. Getting my own family compromised was embarrassing to me, but it gives to a great story around how important it is to protect your passwords, protect your accounts, and how passwordless can avoid somebody that compromises an account. Because even having multi-factor authentication on my Fortnite account, I was at that 0.1% that still was compromised, because the multi-factor authentication, that second factor, truly was not a great second factor. Those of you that know Microsoft multi-factor authentication, emailing to a user a code is not recognized as a second factor. Well, with Fortnite it was, and that's how that got compromised. Was they got control of his email account and then could get that code to steal that account. Now that the Xfinity account is on a passwordless authenticator app, there's no way that anybody can now steal that account. So hopefully everybody has gained some thoughts and things to take forward in terms of authentication. Feel free to think about my personal story and use it how you will around how you can feel that you're secure, but you might not be. To continue to review and audit how secure somebody is within your environment, and always deal with that principles of zero trust. Utilize within your organization reviewing user risk and conditional access policies to constantly verify that somebody is who they say they are. Privileged identity management for your administrator accounts, and bring your organization to some level of that modern authentication, whether it's simply multi-factor authentication or getting yourself to some passwordless level of authentication so that you no longer rely on passwords within your organization. Thank you very much for this time. I appreciate the time being given by the organizers of this event, and thank you for tuning in, and feel free to reach out to me on the social media links provided if you have any questions. Thank you very much. Have a great day.